We continue with economic growth. It's a causes of economic growth. In the short term, an increase in aggregate demand may stimulate a rise in output. If the economy has unused resources, for example, a rise in consumption resulting from an increased consumer confidence or a cut in income tax may encourage firms to increase their output. This would cause a movement from inside towards the production possibility curve. So what they are saying basically is this. When we talk about economic growth, it means that output is increasing in that economy. That's economic growth. So here we said within the short term, an increase in aggregate demand will stimulate rise in the output if the economy has on use. That means when we talk about increase in aggregate demand, we can in the short run, if there's an increase in aggregate demand, it is possible for output to rise in the short run if there are unused resources. Do you get the point I'm making here? If resources are unused in the short run, then it's easy for firms to increase their output based on increase in demand, based on increase in demand, based on aggregate demand, increase in aggregate demand.
Yes.
That's in the short run. So now they said, for example, rise in consumption resulting from increase in consumer confidence or a cut in income tax may encourage firms to increase their output. This would cause a movement from inside towards the production possibility curve. In the long run, an economy can continue to experience economic growth only if the quantity or quality of resources increases. So what are they trying to say here? If the country is still operating, within the PPC, that means inside its PPC, that means there are still unused resources. So if there's an increase in aggregate demand as a result of that, in the short run, firms can respond to that by increasing their output. Get the point? We're talking about economic growth, which might be as a result of increase in the level of income based on the fact that there's tax cuts or there's consumer confidence about the future. So these two things will lead to an increase in aggregate demand. And if aggregate demand increases, firms must respond by producing more output or increasing their output. So the only way they can increase their output in the short run is if there are unused resources. If there are unused resources, that means the economy is not still operating on its PPC, outside its PPC or within its PPC. So at that point in time, the unused resources will cause a movement from inside to outside of the PPC. So, when we say a PPC means the maximum you can produce as a given economy if all resources are fully utilized. So if you are still operating, if you have not reached your potential, that means there are some resources that are still unemployed. If resources are still unemployed and aggregate demand increases in the economy, in the short run, firms will be able to respond because there are still resources available to respond to that production.
Yes.
But in the long run, if aggregate demand continues to increase, there must be new resources to be able to meet up with this increase in aggregate demand. That is the point they are making here. Do you get it?
Yes.
There will be movement towards the production possibility curve if there are still unused resources. But if aggregate demand increases in an economy, in the long run, to sustain it, firms must be able to produce or increase the use of resources, not unused one now. Let's say this is a classroom. It has 20 seats, it has 20 capacity of seats, like 20 people could sit down here. If we have 7 students, that means if the demand of students increases to 17, that means additional 10 students. We still have unused resources, they can still occupy it. But if we have additional more students in the future, the 20 students, if we have more students, it will be more than 20 students, right? So the resources we have cannot be enough. So we need additional class. That is what they are trying to say there. So this would, okay. So the quantity of resources may rise as a result of, for example, an increase in the net investment or the size of the labor force. The quality of resources may increase due to an improvement in education and training and advances in technology. In this case, there will be a shift to the right of the PPC. Movement will be as a result of unused resources. There will be shift in the PPC outside when we are able to find resources. And how can we get resources? It means we are improving the quality and the quantity of resources. We can improve the quantity of resources if we have new resources available. Maybe they are able to, that there's new exploration of resources or discovery of new resources. That is the quantity. But when we talk about, or maybe new firms are investing, or new workers they are able to employ more workers. These are still quantity. But when we talk about quality, we're talking about advancement in technology, we're talking about education and training. Do you understand what we're talking about? So with education and training, it does not only increase the quantity, it also improves the quantity to become quality. So maybe we need more workers to be able to increase our output. But increasing the numbers of workers might not be enough. Maybe they have to be trained. So training them, improving their skills would help the quality of the workers to increase their productivity. So in the long run, when there's increase in aggregate demand, it is important to find new resources or to employ more workers. And when that is in quantity, and for quality, we have to think about advancement in technology, we have to think about education and training. Is it clear? Yes. So if these things happen, then it will shift the PPC curve rightward. So what are the consequences of economic growth? They said an increase in output can improve living standards of people. Access to more goods and services can improve their living conditions and increase their life expectancy. In richer economies, people are likely to consume luxury products. Have better healthcare, go for better education than in poor economies. In very poor countries, economic growth is essential to ensure that people have access to basic necessities. So an increase in output will improve the living standards. Why? Because people have access to goods and services that can improve their living conditions. You know, your living standard, when you have accessibility to things that can improve your life, then your standard of living would improve. And what are those things we are talking about? We're talking about improved goods and services, quality goods and services. But poor economies, countries that are poor, they will strive to ensure that the population are able to, have the basic needs, not luxury. But in the economy that is growing and the economy that the living standard is high, they will even be able to purchase luxury. That is the difference between a poor economy and a rich economy. So higher output, are you there, please? Yes. Higher output and incomes increase government tax revenue, making it easier for government to finance measures to reduce poverty, increase healthcare provision, and raise educational standards. Without having to raise tax rates, poverty can be reduced in numbers of ways. Some of the extra tax revenue rates can be used to increase benefits for the poor, to improve schooling in poor area, and provide training to the unemployed. So when there's higher output in the economy, government tax revenue would increase, because at that point in time, income tax, government will be able to make income tax, government will be able to generate income tax, government will be able to generate corporate tax. But it is not necessary that government should increase taxes to be able to help the poor. Government can do this by, taxing the rich more than the poor. That is the point they are making here. So with that, if revenue generated from tax increases, government will be able to, help the poor by providing them with education, by providing them with merit goods that the private sector cannot only provide. Do you understand? Yes. So as an economic growth, its political and economic standing and influence usually increase. Voting power at International Monetary Fund, for example, is influenced by the size of the economy's GDP. Economic growth, however, can involve cost. If the economy is working at full capacity, it may be necessary to shift resources from making consumer goods to capital goods. In order for it to grow, such a shift will reduce living standards as few goods and services will be available for households. This is, however, only a short-term cost, as in the longer term, the extra capital goods will enable manufacture of more consumer goods. So if the economy wants to survive in the long run, the economy must shift from producing consumer goods to producing capital goods. But it comes at a cost. Because when you invest more on capital goods, it means you are investing more on goods, on human made equipment or human made resources that will be able to help you to produce other resources. Do you understand? So in the short run, the economy might have scarcity of consumer goods. But in the long run, the economy will be able to produce sufficient consumer goods. That was the case of what we're talking about Libya. They think about the short term, not about the long term. So they think about consumption rather than thinking about capital goods. When you think about capital goods, more investment in capital goods might reduce spending on consumer goods, which will make consumer goods scarce and expensive. But in the long run, what you have invested on will give more, double of consumer goods. Because capital goods are used in producing consumer goods. Do you understand?
Yes.
So if an economy that is focusing on consumer goods will enjoy in the short term and have problem in the long term. An economy that is investing in capital goods right now will pay the price in the short run, but enjoy it in the long run.
Yes.
So that is the point there. So the short term and the long term effect of devoting more resources to capital goods. Higher output can increase pollution, lead to depletion of non-renewable resources, and damage the natural environment. More factories and cars may increase carbon dioxide emissions. Rapid expansion of the furniture and fishing industries, for example, may result in deforestation and depletion of fish stocks respectively. Construction of more factories, offices, roads, and other infrastructure can also destroy the wildlife habitats. Due to these risks, economists are increasingly emphasizing the need for sustainable economic growth. Economic growth may also lead to greater stress on workers. An increase of output may require some people to work for longer hours, some to learn new skills, and some to change their job. So what you're trying to let us know here is that when there is economic growth, in the short run, resources are used. But in the long run, in the short run, it's advantageous because economic activity will be booming, income or revenue will be working up, aggregate demand will increase, output will increase. But what happens in the long run? In the long run, resources might be depleted. That means a lot of resources will be used. That means resources might be out of use. So it will lead to pollution. It will lead to deforestation because more offices might need to be, built. And this means that they have to cut down some habitats. Do you understand? So these are the consequences of economic growth. So economists are saying that there should be what we call sustainable economic growth. That means whatever economic growth we are trying to use, it has to be that one. That means whatever decisions we take in terms of economic growth, it has to be a decision that will last for more generations. Do you understand?
Yes.
So go to economic growth rate. It is important to avoid the confusion between the fall in the economic growth rate and the fall in national output. If a country's economic rate falls from 5% to 3%, output will still be rising, although it will be rising at a slower rate. If output reduces, the economic growth rate will be negative. So there's a difference between economic growth rate and output. For economic growth rate, if it's falling, it does not mean that output is falling. It might mean that output might, be rising at a lower rate. But when output is falling, it will affect the economic rate. That is the point there. Do you get it? Because when output falls, the economic growth rate, economy will decline. So that means the economic growth rate will come to negative. Do you understand the difference now?
Yes.
Okay. The policies to promote economic growth. They say if an economy is operating with spare capacity, that means they are still unused resources. A government may use expansionary fiscal policy or monetary policy to promote economic growth. A reduction in income tax rate or a cut in the rate of interest, for example, would be expected to increase consumer expenditure and investment. The resulting rise in aggregate demand is likely to encourage firms to increase their output. They will be able to do this as they will be able to take an unemployed workers and buy more capital equipment to expand their production. So if the country is still operating, or if the economy is still operating on its spare capacity, it means that they are still unemployed resources. It could be in terms of workers, it could be in terms of natural resources. So what could government do? Government could reduce tax rate. Government could reduce interest rate, because it's using these two things would increase spending within the economy. And as spending increases in the economy, a lot of firms will be motivated to produce more. And because of doing that, they might need to employ more workers. Okay. So the effectiveness of fiscal and monetary policy measures will be influenced by a number of factors. For example, households and firms may not spend more despite the lower rate of interest rate and lower rates if they lack confidence. If the rate of interest rate is already very low, there may not be much room to cut it further. And anyway, a very small reduction may have little impact. So government might have come up with expansionary fiscal policy or monetary policy, but it does not mean that households will still want to buy. Why? Maybe they lack confidence about the economy. They will still feel like, no, maybe it's just going to be for a while. We don't want to spend. Let's keep our money, please. So as aggregate demand tends to increase over time, it means that without any change in aggregate supply, the maximum level of output will be reached. So in the long run, an economy can continue to increase the output it produces only if it gets more resources or higher quality resources. This means that to help achieve long-run economic growth, a government needs to use both demand side and supply side policy measures to increase productive potential. For example, a government may seek to improve education and training. If successful, these measures will raise labor productivity and so productive capacity. There is, of course, no guarantee the supply side policy measures will work. So what they are trying to say is that if government wants to achieve long-term economic growth, government has to use both demand side policy and supply side policy. When we talk about demand side policy, we're talking about fiscal policy, monetary policy, and the supply side policy. Government has to use these three policies if it wants to sustain a long-term growth. Is it clear?
Yes.
So go to the questions. What is meant by economic growth?
See.
An increase in the real GDP, yes. Question 2. It said the diagram shows country economic growth over the period of 2012 to 2016. What can be said about this? Okay.
Output.
2012 to 2016. Output was highest in 2012.
So it's D because D.
No, in 2012.
No,
Output was
D.
not. Output was highest in 2016. No.
D.
Output fell from 2014 to 2016.
No, it's D because we said
It
that
fell.
economic growth cannot affect output. So the most reasonable answer is D.
Output was unchanged.
Yes, in
Between
2012.
2012 to 2013.
Yes, it doesn't.
Yes.
So it's D because
It's D, yeah.
it doesn't affect output.
Yeah, sure. It's D. Question 4. If consumers' expenditure is 30 billion, government expenditure is 10 billion, investment is 20 billion, export is 60 billion, imports are 20 billion. What is the GDP? It's 30 plus 40
So it's 50
plus 60
60 plus 60
plus 60 minus
60 plus 4. That's it. 60.
minus 4, 56.
Oh yeah, minus 4.
56 billion. A. What is most likely to cause economic growth? An increase in capital depreciation, an increase in education and training workers, an increase in taxation, an increase in unemployment. B.
Yeah.
So that's all about economic growth and consequences.